What if I told you that the glamorous life of a Victorian aristocrat was actually a freezing soot-covered nightmare disguised as a golden palace? We've all seen the movies, the sparkling chandeliers, the elegant tea parties, the romantic candlelit hallways. But the real history of these mansions is a total architectural scam. In reality, these massive stone structures were industrial death traps that required a small army of invisible laborers just to keep the internal temperature above freezing. Behind every polished silver platter was a story of toxic gases, hazardous coal dust, and social rules so rigid they'd make a modern drill sergeant blush. Today, we're tearing down the velvet curtains and exposing the 22 dumbest myths about Victorian mansion life that are actually epic lies. Get ready to have your romanticized view of the 19th century completely demolished. Because the truth about these luxury homes is much weirder and way grosser than you ever imagined. Forget the idea of cozy nights by the fire and effortless elegance. Because living in a Victorian mansion was basically like being a cog in a giant coal-powered machine. These houses weren't designed for human comfort. They were built to showcase status at the cost of health, safety, and any shred of personal privacy. From the invisible staff who lived in the walls to the lethal fashion choices required just to survive a dinner party, the Victorian era was a masterclass in style over substance. We are diving deep into the soot-stained reality of the 1800s to uncover why your dream period home was actually a logistical disaster. If you think a drafty window is annoying, wait until you hear about the death traps hiding in the lighting and the literal biohazards lurking in the bedrooms. This isn't your history teacher's version of the past. This is the raw, unpolished truth about the era that invented the golden cage lifestyle. You've probably heard that Victorian mansions were the peak of cozy domesticity, but in reality they were icy stone boxes where the water jugs frequently froze solid overnight. Even in the late 1800s, central heating was a total myth for most, meaning residents relied entirely on open fireplaces that only warmed a tiny 3-foot radius. Step 5 feet away from the hearth, and you were essentially entering a walk-in freezer disguised as a luxury drawing room. There's a persistent lie that servants were treated like part of the family, when the architectural truth shows they were designed to be literally invisible human ghosts. Mansions were built with a green baize door that functioned as a sonic and visual barrier to hide the low-class staff from the wealthy owners at all times. And if a maid accidentally bumped into the master of the house in a hallway, she was legally required to turn and face the wall. We often imagine Victorian mansions as clean and pristine, but they were actually covered in a permanent greasy layer of black coal soot that ruined everything it touched. Because every room needed a fire, the average 19th century mansion burned through industrial quantities of coal, creating a localized smog cloud inside the house itself. Maids had to spend hours every single morning scrubbing black rain off the expensive silk wallpaper just to keep the house from looking like a cave. People think footmen were just tall guys in fancy suits, but they were actually the 19th century equivalent of decorative human lawn ornaments used to flex a family's wealth. These men were hired specifically based on their height and the symmetry of their calves because they had to look identical while standing perfectly still for hours. Their main job wasn't helping, it was simply existing as an expensive, breathing piece of furniture that signaled the owner had money to burn. You might think the butler was just a waiter, but in a real Victorian mansion, he was the high-stakes CEO of a complex, subterranean corporate empire. He held the only keys to the wine cellar and the silver safe, making him the most powerful and feared person in the entire household hierarchy. If the silver went missing, it wasn't just a theft, it was a total collapse of the mansion's security system that could ruin the family's reputation overnight. A common myth is that Victorian ladies spent their days lounging in luxury, but they were actually trapped in corset armor that made basic physical tasks impossible. Dressing for the day in the 1870s was a 2-hour engineering project that required a professional assistant to literally winch the lady into her clothing. Because of the steel plates and whalebone stays, a woman couldn't even put on her own shoes or bend over without risking a permanent injury. You've heard that Victorian dinners were romantic, but the lighting was actually a toxic chemical hazard that caused chronic headaches and made everyone's skin look green. Before electricity, mansions used coal gas lamps that pumped sulfur compounds and carbon monoxide directly into the unventilated dining rooms. Guests often left these elegant parties feeling physically ill because they'd spent 3 hours breathing in the byproduct of a 19th century gas plant. There's a lie that Victorian kitchens were cozy places for baking, but the Kitchener stove was a 100-kilogram cast-iron monster that turned the basement into a sauna. These massive coal-fired machines had to stay lit 24 hours a day because they took half a day to reach cooking temperature, making the kitchen staff's life a living hell. The heat was so intense that cooks often suffered from permanent heat exhaustion, just to ensure the master's roast beef was served at the perfect temperature. We think of tea time as a casual break, but in a Victorian mansion, it was a high-stakes social currency system used to filter out poor or unfashionable people. The visiting card system was a complex ritual where leaving a card with a folded corner could mean the difference between a social invitation and a permanent snub. It was a 19th century version of an invite-only social media app where one wrong move resulted in total social ostracism. You've probably seen ghostly white furniture in old movies and thought it was for aesthetics, but those were dust covers used because the house was constantly rotting. When a family left for the summer, every single item was wrapped in light-colored fabric to protect it from the relentless assault of moths, dampness, and coal soot. A mansion in hibernation looked like a graveyard of white shapes because the environment was simply too hostile to leave expensive velvet exposed. There is a clean myth about Victorian laundry, but the reality was a multi-day chemical nightmare involving boiling vats of lye and dangerous bluing agents. Laundresses in the 1880s lived in 100% humidity and frequently developed respiratory diseases from the toxic steam required to keep the family's collars white. It took 4 full days of backbreaking manual labor just to process 1 week's worth of the mansion's endless supply of napkins and shirts. People believe Victorian windows were for the view, but they were actually drafty single-pane heat leaks that required massive velvet curtains just to stop the wind. These curtains weren't just for decoration, they were a critical insulation layer meant to trap a pocket of not freezing air between the glass and the room. Without those heavy drapes, a gust of wind in 1860 could literally blow out every candle in the drawing room and drop the temperature instantly. You might think the night watch was for burglars, but the biggest fear in a Victorian mansion was the gas pipes literally exploding in the middle of the night. Because early gas plumbing was notoriously leaky, the smell of rotten eggs was a constant companion that signaled a potential internal demolition. Butlers had to perform a lockup ritual every night, checking every single gas tap, because one forgotten valve could level the entire stone structure. The grand staircase is famous, but the servants' stairs were a hidden, vertical obstacle course designed to be as steep and narrow as possible to save space. While the owners glided up the marble steps, the staff had to haul 20-kilogram buckets of coal up wooden ladders disguised as stairs in total darkness. These hidden corridors were intentionally unventilated and unheated, creating a literal stairway to hell for the people who actually ran the house. We imagine Victorian beds as the height of comfort, but they were actually terrifying feather mountains that required a maid to iron the sheets while the owner was still in them. Because the rooms were so damp, the sheets would become clammy and cold, requiring a warming pan filled with hot coals to be slid under the covers. And if the maid wasn't careful, she could literally set the bed, and the person in it, on fire before they even fell asleep. You've heard about the fancy Victorian wallpaper, but many of the most popular patterns were colored with Scheele's green, a dye made of literal arsenic. In a damp mansion, the moisture would react with the wallpaper, releasing toxic arsenic gas into the bedrooms while the family slept. Thousands of wealthy Victorians were slowly being poisoned by their own luxury decor, leading to mysterious illnesses that doctors of the time simply couldn't explain. There's a myth that Victorians were obsessed with fresh air, but the windows were almost never opened because the outside air was a thick soup of horse manure dust and coal smoke. Opening a window in London in 1850 didn't let in a breeze. It let in a layer of London smog that would coat the furniture in a greasy film within minutes. The indoor air was a stale mix of gas fumes and body odor, which is exactly why Victorians were so obsessed with heavy perfumes. People think Victorian mansions had great plumbing, but chamber pots remained a mandatory bedside accessory because the few flush toilets were often located in the basement. Walking through a freezing, pitch-black mansion at 3 in the morning to find a bathroom was so dangerous that people preferred to keep their business in a ceramic bowl under the bed. And the morning routine for a junior maid? Emptying these slop jars by hand every single day. You've seen the sparkling silver, but keeping it that way required a toxic mixture of mercury and crushed bones that slowly poisoned the silver pantry staff. To get that mirror finish required by high society etiquette, servants had to rub the metal for hours with abrasive, unregulated chemicals. The glitter of a Victorian dinner table was literally bought with the health and neurological stability of the people working below the stairs. A popular lie is that Victorian mansions were quiet, but the nervous system of bells in the hallway created a constant, chaotic ringing that never truly stopped. Every room had a wire connected to a pendulum in the kitchen, and ignoring a bell was a firing offense that could leave a servant homeless. The house was a constant cacophony of ringing, clicking, and mechanical movements as the staff scrambled to respond to every whim of the owners. You might think attic rooms were quaint, but they were actually temperature torture chambers where the servants lived in the most extreme conditions imaginable. In the summer, the uninsulated roof turned the attic into an oven. In the winter, the lack of fireplaces made it as cold as a morgue. The upper class lived in the middle floors where the air was temperate, while the staff suffered at the literal thermal extremes of the building. And the biggest lie of all? That the Victorian mansion was a symbol of stability, when it was actually a crumbling, high-maintenance money pit that bankrupted countless families. The sheer cost of coal, candles, and the massive staff required to fight the natural decay of the building was a financial black hole. By the end of the era, these mansions were being abandoned because the modern world had finally realized that living in a coal-powered stone fortress was a dumb, unsustainable nightmare.